all of your fears will come true.
What do you mean by that?
It's just a way of life. In the crisis, what is the single thing that matters most?
You had to deal with a different type of crisis. The Dusit terrorist attack in Nairobi, in which you lost 6 of your employees. How did your leadership change in that crisis? You've built a reputation as an impressive African entrepreneur. Why did you think we needed that business at that specific time?
The idea that we could create a world-class business as Africans who came from very similar backgrounds, and that it would be like a beacon of hope.
Why was it so challenging?
Think about it. You got an idea and you put it on paper, and then you need to bring it to life. You need to find the capital for it. You need to assemble the team for it. Like, those are all very, very difficult things to do.
But you are still one of very few African founders who has successfully been able to raise significant amounts of money from very prestigious financial institutions.
You've persisted enough, at some point you get lucky.
But then how long? I think a lot of people would have probably given up.
We were never in a hurry to get rich quick.
So what was it in you that said, no, with persistence, I'll actually get it. This thing will take off?
So it really requires for you to bring your A game every single day on a couple of multiple fronts to really have a shot at succeeding.
So welcome to the Doers Defined Podcast, where our mission is to amplify emerging market heroes who are bringing positive change. And today, I am incredibly honored to have my guest and friend, Ken Njoroge. Welcome to Doers Defined.
Thank you, Elsie. Absolute pleasure to be here, and absolutely interested in having a conversation about the ecosystem and how we make a difference to the entrepreneurship space on the continent.
Wonderful. So I'll dive right in. You've built a reputation as an impressive African entrepreneur. Your contributions to the entrepreneurial ecosystem are unlike any other, and you've received many prestigious awards as a result. And the ones that come to mind, first, Global Endeavor Entrepreneur from Sub-Saharan Africa, the Schwab Foundation Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year Award, Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. You've been listed as one of the most influential Africans. And with that, you have 5 children. You're married to Koi. Ken, that's an impressive resume. So let me ask you, what 3 adjectives do you use to describe yourself?
Wow, Elsie, that's it's an interesting question. I think the first one that comes to mind is favored. I feel very fortunate to have been put in a position across my life where I had exposure to the opportunities that I've had. So favored is one word. The second one, I think, is probably stretched, right? It's been a very long journey of building the family and building the business. So that has stretched me in very many positive ways. So stretched is that one. And I think the other one, I'm still inspired to do more, right? As I listen to you talk about what the journey has been, it's flashed in my mind. Yeah, it's probably been like 2 decades of doing that. I think I've gas for 3 more decades of doing the work that I do and creating more impact. I think that keeps me going every day. The family is grown, much larger now. So there are 6 children. So
What? Okay, I missed that.
Our firstborn, our first son was got married,
Okay.
and then they got a kid this year. So we've got 2 new additions to the family.
So you're a grandfather.
The family of 5.
That's a savvy grandfather.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the word, the cool word for it. Is it? I hear dada. Or grandpa or something. I think we'll figure that out by the time the young man starts talking in another year or so.
No, congratulations. Yeah. That's amazing. I think what many people might not know is that you are actually destined for a career in the medical field, specifically pharmacy.
Yeah.
Was there a specific event or moment that led you away from pharmacy?
Yeah, so I ended up in pharmacy school as a result of programming of our education system. I think throughout education, we were always given a very simple message, and there was actually a song on radio that drove that message, and the message was like, go to school, get good grades, then you will go to university, you get a good course in uni. And if you do well, you'll get a good job. And there was a song. I'm sure you probably know it. So many vi jana. It was a Swahili song.
Mm-hmm. You can continue singing.
Tuongeze bidii, basically work hard. Mwisho wa kusoma, at the end of education, utapata kazi nzuri sana. You'll get a really good job. And so I followed that script. My mom was a single parent. So basically what we lacked in money, my mom compensated for attention and discipline and aspiration to really be the best that one could be. So it was quite easy for me in whatever school setting I was set up to sort of rise to the top, right? Like that's what I was conditioned to do. So at the end of high school, the top students typically went to medical school, engineering school, and so on. I was kind of sure that I didn't want to be a doctor. Because I didn't particularly like biology.
Yeah.
But I love physics, chemistry, maths, and so on. I did very well. So, teachers then said, why don't you choose pharmacy? It has the highest cutoff. Basically, the best of the best actually make it to pharmacy school. Yeah. It took about 25 students in the year that I graduated out of high school. So that's how I ended up there. And I don't think there was any knowledge or understanding what pharmacy was. The internet was not a thing way back in 1992. So I'm revealing my age now. So I ended up in pharmacy school as a result of that. The detour that took me into a different path happened in the gap year, right? So the way the system works in Kenya is that we had a 2-year sort of holding period before university. And my mom, and basically I used to hang around a sort of small neighborhood kiosks, sort of playing draft, which is like some local version of chess. Mm-hmm. And so my mom looked at this guy as like, okay, this guy, he can't waste 2 years. She shipped me to my auntie in Nairobi. And then a couple of weeks later, she faxed me a piece of paper from the newspaper. Mm-hmm.
Faxed?
Yeah, faxed in those days.
I wanted to emphasize that.
And the Strathmore, which is a very good institution, and it's now a university. At that time, it was a college. They were traditionally an accounting and secretarial college. And they were introducing computers into their curriculum. And so they were essentially offering a bunch of scholarships for first class. So I applied, went for the interview, and then got admitted into this school. And I think the transformation happened in Strathmore. It was such an inspiration organization. It ran well. It was very clean. They had teachers the lecturers that essentially were practitioners in industry. And I remember one lecturer who used to bring magazines of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Time Magazine and Newsweek. And we'd spend the whole class talking about this. We'd learn strategy and all of that by just looking at their stories. That was so compelling.
Yeah.
So 2 years of that, you can imagine. By the time I was done with 2 years of this gap thing, my mind had been shaped around the fact that actually elite, like the top of the stack in this kind of thing was actually to start a tech business. And most of these guys started businesses in their late teens, early 20s. And so the bug hit me, and I never recovered from it.
Yeah.
That good people build $1 billion tech businesses.
Wow.
And that's what I've been chasing all my life.
Yeah, but also done incredibly well. So I think that's a nice transition, because in 2002, you and your co-founder, Bolaji Akimboro from Nigeria, sat at a cafe and sketched out the idea of a payments platform. And the result of that was the Pan-African fintech giant Cellulant, which you're best known for as the CEO and co-founder for about 17 years. Ken, let me ask you, why did you think we needed that business at that specific time?
Yeah, 2002 it was. And to be quite honest, we were married to the idea of sort of building a world-class business rather than the business model. We had this inkling that, everything that you saw on the internet would make its way to mobile in one form or another. It was very clear that mobile was going to be a large platform for Africans across markets. Bolaji was Nigerian, I was Kenyan. Both of our countries was generally dysfunctional. And so how we ended up sort of sketching this vision was always, we met over coffee and just complained about what wasn't working in Nigeria and so on. And it was almost like a competition about, in Kenya, it's a mess too. In Nigeria, it's a bigger mess and so on. So at some point we said, hey, are we going to, complain about what doesn't work, or are we going to do something about it? And it was very clear that, look, we've got to make a difference. And it was very clear none of us are politicians. So I think the idea of Cellulant was less about the business idea, more about the idea that we could create a world-class business as Africans who came from very similar backgrounds. Bolaji also was brought up by his mom and his elder brother. Very similar backgrounds. So we were essentially coming from the classic story where most Africans would come from. But we said, look, we need to create a business that's so large that nobody would have an excuse for not being excellent, right? Like it didn't matter what background you came from, and you could do it in Africa. We said for Africa and by Africans, right? Like we could do it ourselves. And we always said, look, you win the war with the cards you have. Yes, the education system doesn't work in both Kenya and Nigeria. Yes, electricity doesn't work. But we were determined to create a company that had such a level of excellence that it didn't really matter all those other things, and that it would be like a beacon of hope for people that looked like us and that came from similar backgrounds. That was the thesis of Cellulant. And then we figured out, okay, let's go into the market and find a business model
Okay.
that can support that mission.
Okay.
And then we went actually through several transitions before we landed on payments. So we could sense that payments was going to be big, but it wasn't ready for payments yet. So we started off as a content business, and then we became a software platform for banks, and then we evolved into the payments business and the payment processor that we are today.
Okay. No, fascinating. And then I think for many folks who are watching or listening, they might not know just how difficult it was to get a payments license back then from the Central Bank of Kenya. Why was it so challenging, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, Actually, over the years, there was, a couple of licenses that typically we had to consider at different times. So in the early phases of the journey, was basically getting a license to operate in the mobile space from telecom regulators. And then very early on was copyright licenses for music and all of that. And then later, of course, the central bank licenses for payments and so on. What we found generally from a regulatory point of view, first, we were a pioneer, right? We were showing up at the regulator wanting to do things that generally were sort of new. So there was just that traditional sense of, okay, what do you guys want to do? It's not in the market structure. And then, basically walking the regulator through essentially just sheer persistence and making a case and pushing to get the regulator to a point where they actually saw that, okay, maybe less about the point of what we wanted to do, more that these folks just won't go away, right? They seem hell-bent on making this happen. They just won't go away. And we just kept at it. And we showed up, were respectful. We did the hard work of sort of building and understanding how they thought about things from their context, and just sheer persistence.
And if I recall correctly, you used to go every week without fail.
Yes, there's that legendary experience in Kenya for the communications regulator in the very early days. Yeah, I told the regulator I'm gonna come here every Tuesday, same time, same story, without fail, until you give me this license. And I just did it, and then you just programmed it into your time, and at some point it just became a game. They also expected they'd look at you and say, "You again?" And you're like, "Yes, me again," still wanting to create jobs for Africans. And at some point, you persist enough. At some point, you get lucky. Right.
But then how long? How long was that persisting of going to the office every single day?
Yeah,
every single week.
Yeah, I think that for the communications license in Kenya, that took me about a year and a half.
Wow.
Of just pushing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I say wow because I think a lot of people would have probably given up with that and just thought, this is not a viable business. So what was it in you that said, no, with persistence, I'll actually get it. This thing will take off?
Yeah. Honestly, I think there was always a sense and I think it's now I find that it's just a way of life. There's always a sense in that, you ask yourself a question. It's like, how important is this thing that we're doing? Like, how important is it? Why, as a sense of why we do it. And if it is, then almost always, then you just, then the regulator, the obstacle has no way but to give in, right? Like it's, and then because we knew it was always going to be hard, and we knew it was going to be long. So we could, your sense of energy was always managed by that fact that you knew it was going to be hard and you knew it was going to be long.
You had staying power.
Yeah, correct. And there was, we were never in a hurry to get rich quick. We were never. We knew that to build something that large, then you have to sink the roots deep. And that meant sometimes just pushing and pushing and pushing, even when you saw no effort, right? Like you can imagine chasing a license for like a year and a half, and you can't actually launch before the license. You actually have very little to show for the effort, right?
Yeah.
We just kept at it, right?
But you're also known in the market, and this is why it's so inspiring that you refused to give a bribe throughout that 1 year and a half.
Yeah.
And perhaps it could have been easier had you been willing to essentially, question that integrity, if that wasn't so core to who you are.
Yeah. Frankly speaking, a sense of integrity is probably upbringing. I can't quite say that, like as an adult, that I sat and said, okay, I'm not going to bribe and it's not a good thing to do. I'm going to go to hell if I do.
Yeah.
I just have to credit upbringing. I think values, integrity, and doing the right thing was driven by my mom with no gray areas.
Oh, we need to give her flowers for that.
Like
Yeah,
there was
what a remarkable woman.
There was no gray areas about integrity in our household. So when I came out of that household, I was tough in terms of just being able to withstand discomfort. I think I had a very. My wife laughs at this. She calls it some kind of reality distortion. The amount of money in my pocket versus my dreams, they are not connected. Like I have the ability to dream without any connection to reality, and that was driven by my mom because she said, the amount of money that you have in your pocket and what you think you can do and what you're able to do, they're not connected. And I think that's positive also, even when I later had a lot more resources than normal. You don't particularly change your personality and so on. Like you're fairly grounded.
You have been quoted numerous times saying that entrepreneurship is a high-performing sport. What do you mean by that?
It is because, so think about it. So you got an idea, it's in your head, and you put it on paper. And then you need to bring it to life. You need to find the capital for it. You need to assemble the team for it. You need to wear down regulators around it. Then you need to go out and find a space for it in the market that's busy and distracted. Like those are all very, very difficult things to do. And each one of them requires the highest sense of mastery, right? Like, hiring teams. In the early days, we had no money, and you build a great business by hiring very good people. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
And good people are not kind of sitting at home unemployed,
and they're not cheap.
So you're essentially going out and convincing these people to come and join dream for a business that's on paper. That's requires a lot of skill. You're beating down regulators. You're trying to understand what are their priorities. You're trying to make a case, right? So it's not just sort of brute force. I'm gonna be there until like it's you're going in. You're listening. You're listening to their priorities. You're shape shifting. You're looking at easy spots in the market. You're making so it's really high performance, and then you're doing that. You yourself have taken a sort of a knock in your life. You're dealing with progress debt, right? So because you're always top of class and so on. So I dropped out of pharmacy school. So my pharmacy school graduates have graduated.
Yes.
The peers have graduated. They've gone into Big Four and so on and so forth. So you're looking at your peers. They're moving ahead. Like it's a lot of things to take in. So it really requires for you to bring your A game every single day on a couple of multiple fronts to really have a shot at succeeding. So it's a high performance sport.
Yeah. No, great analogy. And I think when I first heard you say that, I was like, it makes sense. Because 17 years at the helm is a long time.
It is. And then also what happens is that what's different, you see today, if you're a sort of world-class sprinter, it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. The system will find you, right? Like the spotters.
Yes.
Like the system is well developed.
The structures.
Yeah, the structures, the spotting of talent, and then how the sprinter is developed, the coach, the physio, the training schools, like those setups are there. For entrepreneurs, you assemble that yourself. Almost, and for some of us pioneers in the OGs of like entrepreneur, like it's a DIY, right?
Yeah.
Like it's through trial and error.
Do it yourself.
Yeah, it's like through trial and error and so on. So it's quite a rich experience. I think I think from the entrepreneurial journey, the thing that despite it being very tough, the thing that I have absolute joy for and gratitude for is actually who you become, throughout the journey. What it turns you, what it makes you.
Well, what do you think it made you?
I think it makes you suddenly more spiritual. Somebody always says if you are an atheist, start a business, you'll find God.
Yeah, because you have no control over
Because
anything.
you have no control over anything. No assumption that you make will actually play out. So it makes you more spiritual, more God-fearing. I think the journey also makes you more hopeful. Like all of your fears will come true, but they will also come to pass, right? Like, and patient. My Koi always says that, wake up every morning, take a glass full of patience and go to battle.
Every single day.
Every single day.
Yeah. No, wow. You're right. You're absolutely right about that analogy. And I'll just come back to that, because I think it's also important to understand what resources as an entrepreneur. If it's a high-performing sport, then let me ask you, what resources do you think an entrepreneur requires to have that longevity?
Yeah. I think the first and maybe maybe exists in a lot of markets is basically a lot of examples that are close to you that you can relate to. When we started Cellulant at the time, I remember I just got married, so sort of year one into the business. And in our culture, we go to Russia, to pick the bride.
Yes.
And my family, and then your family puts on their best game face, like they're going to sell you.
Yes, to win the bride.
I tell you, the people from my extended family just struggled to understand what I do, right? Because, starting a business is not a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not, like there's nobody in their immediate circle that has ever started a successful business.
But
right?
I think not just a successful business, Ken, but to the scale at what you were building Cellulant.
Oh, yeah, or what we were dreaming or what I was evangelizing. Like it just is, and it's because people just haven't seen it. I think the times have changed. And, 20 years later, there's myself, there's lots of other entrepreneurs who've done it, and that you can see how that guy is, did this and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing that actually, people have a set of examples for people who have actually built institutions that they can see and that are transparent, right? Like you can be able to tell where it started and where it's going. So it's not a deal thing. It's not like a tenderpreneuring thing. It's like these guys, they started as a kiosk, they grew. You can touch and feel their product and their services in the market and so on and so forth. I think that's number one. Number two, I think the early stage support framework of capital and mentorship. That's patient and that's fit for the environment. So today, if you look at technology, which is probably the more evolved ecosystem where you have a little few of these things coming together, that gap is being supplemented by foreign capital, even to a large extent foreign mentorship as well, right? All the accelerators with foreign advisors that have done it in other markets.
Yes.
And that's great. It probably will cater for the sort of top 10 percentile of entrepreneurs. But there's this huge long tail. For us to be able to catalyze the ecosystem, you need a large number of businesses sort of thriving, coming into the base of the pyramid and thriving, right? Like it's at the beginning of a funnel. And there you need we certainly need a much larger base of local capital And local capital is patient, right? It understands the context and is kind of here to stay, right? So it's not gonna go away because the global markets have changed and so on and so forth, which happens cyclically. So I think if those and then the third thing I think is the corporates in the environment, the government, and people who ideally would be customers of these startups, becoming conscious that it's okay to buy made in Kenya, made in Africa. That there's a sense of pride in doing that. And I think if we catalyzed significantly those factors, I think we have it in us to actually build great institutions and so on. I mean, Cellulant was largely built by us.
Yeah. No, so inspiring, I think, for any entrepreneur listening. But you are still one of very few, and I say still one of very few African founders who has successfully been able to raise significant amounts of money from very prestigious financial institutions. I think when you look back on that journey, what were some of the critical elements for that success?
Yeah. I think the first foundational thing, and which every entrepreneur should aspire to do from the very beginning, is to aspire to build from very early on a well-run, well-governed business. And well-run, probably the best indicator for a well-run business is just the talent that you have. And the space, as an entrepreneur, the space that you give them to operate. So that if somebody met like your technology leader or your commercial leader when you're not there, that they could feel the passion, the clarity of vision, the energy that they have and the passion that they have, and clarity about what we are doing, why we are doing it, and so on. And today, you if you walk into a room and you look at the first 6 people in an organization, you can tell the philosophy of the leader. I think that's one of the, so when you look at a lot of local businesses, that's one of the areas they fail. And so then you have a dynamic where you have a business of one person and a couple of helpers, rather than sort of a team of peers and so on and so forth. It doesn't mean that as founders, we don't have strong views. Like generally, as founders, you have a very clear vision, and there are some areas where you don't tolerate dissent and so on and so forth. But you really lead an army of really strong generals, right? That's one. The second one is just governance, transparency. I think we benefited a lot getting our chairman, who's actually my dad-in-law, and Koi's.
I don't know how you did that.
Koi's dad.
Yeah.
Very early on in the business, Bolaji and I used to say, hey, we need adult supervision, because both of us were strong-minded people. But you're in it. But I found at my first board meeting, and the questions that, because he was not, as a chairman, he was not, and we had our first board meeting when we were probably a team of 7.
Wow.
And we've never missed a board meeting every quarter since then for all of Cellulant's life. So that ability to open up yourself to scrutiny, to be told things that are often uncomfortable, and frankly speaking, every board meeting until I retired as CEO was always every board meeting was always very uncomfortable. Because yes, you've got people and you've given them permission and you've allowed them to ask questions. And because of that, you always attended to things that were not essentially in your line of sight. And you can think about that. So if you do that over 3 years, over 4 years, over 5 years, by the time you're opening yourself up to capital, even you're just your body language to have uncomfortable conversations, investors can feel that, okay, actually you're quite coachable, you're quite receptive to things that are to blind spots and all of that. That when they look at the data, because you've been doing board papers for years and years, your data room, your quality of board papers, your mastery of numbers, your clarity and so on, it just makes a huge difference. So preparing for high quality investors starts from hiring high quality team very early, and then building an advisory board and that you can be transparent to, and creating that culture of transparency. And if you have a good board and you're transparent, they will, the rest is just power of compounding, right? Every quarter, people are sort of asking, okay, why is this margin this way? Why is that? Why are we not thinking about this sector? You really improve over time, and you stand out in any sector. So that's, I think it's really the foundation of actually attracting capital.
But I think with governance, and I'm going to ask this because many people would say, how did you know right at the beginning that you needed to put these governance structures together? Especially because you were building on the continent. Where did that come from? And your board papers, the information that you were putting out, would rival even some of the big firms that were out there. Where did that come from, Ken?
Is a very good question. I think what happened, so when Balaji and I decided to build Cellulant, and we said, okay, this is the size of institution and class of institution we want to build. We were not the first people to start businesses, right? We could looked around and then looked at the graveyard of businesses founded by Africans and said, what is wrong with those businesses? And two things stuck out: the talent they hired and the level of governance. And so Balaji and I were very conscious that actually we don't doubt our ability to ideate and find opportunity in the market. But actually, if these are two things that we see as factors of, killing what were generally promising businesses, we need to fix them from day one, right? It was just around looking at where other people had gone wrong and then loving the mission enough to actually correct those things very early, even when it was uncomfortable, right? Like you can imagine, in our culture, doing businesses with business with your in-law.
Yeah, and that's why I said how
is expressly forbidden.
Yeah, that's why I said
like
how.
Like it's a one thing
Yeah.
that people will take.
I mean, that's full transparency.
Yeah, like
right
you will
there.
be told, do not dare. But Balaji and I, we sat and I'd known my chairman well because he was my customer in my first business. And Balaji and I had met him as we're going through the sort of a process of getting married and so on. And we sat down. We just said he looks like the kind of person that would give us that adult supervision. He was experienced enough. He was actually very pleasant guy even at that time. You could see that. And also third, that he had probably a very good reason for us to do well, right? Like he would have wanted us to do well. And when we discussed it and we said we need adult supervision, Balaji said, I think you're we call him Doc.
Yeah.
I think Doc could be a good chairman. And I said to Balaji, look, I think I know what you're seeing and I see what you're seeing, but I'm too close to the situation to really make a call. So you reflect on it. And if you think that that's a thing that we need to do, let's do it. And Balaji said, look, I mean, I'm certain that that's really the guy. And it turned out to probably be one of the best decisions that we made. He's still our chairman today.
Wow. Now he sounds like a remarkable man. And I'll share this with Koi as well.
100%. Yeah.
But I think for a lot of the listeners or entrepreneurs, I'm sure they'd want to understand, besides building a great business, what are some of the other critical elements that you need to get right for fundraising?
I think, once you get your foundation right, then I think maybe two things come to mind. I think the first one is basically how you package that story. because it's nice that it's great. But there's also a lens within which investors live. There's a context in which they live, and there's a lens within which they see the world. And so when I think in 2018 we were raising a large round. Eventually, a TPG out of the US led that round, and so I had done. So the word in the ecosystem was that African founders generally don't get funding because there'd been a string of headlines. And essentially, out of Nairobi, it was essentially expat founders that typically were raising capital. So I was in a local WhatsApp group. The word was that generally you need to have like a white expat co-founder, in the mix. And so what I did is I reached out and I spoke to a few of the entrepreneurs that were very vocal. And so when I asked them, so, okay, you really, why do you think this is the case? Oh, yes, I tried to raise capital and so on. I said, take me through your process. And then one of them said, okay, I talked to 3 investors. Then another one said, okay. So I said, okay, maybe it's true, but actually it's also probable that they lack discipline, right? So I said, okay, of course, if you want to raise capital, like it's a sales process. You can't talk to 3 guys and then you don't raise capital and then sort of make sweeping statements that African founders don't get funded.
Yeah.
It's probably true and there was a lot of data, but certainly you didn't put any effort. So I had a short list of like 60 investors, hired a financial advisor and went to the market. So I was very clear that, okay, if there's probably, that much more difficult, then you just have to work that much harder. And throughout that process, for 6 months in, I went and there was like 4 investors that were sort of lukewarm. They love a business. They could see there was something, but they were just not closing. So, and then it happened to coincide with the time when I was getting into the Endeavor network.
Yes.
And so somewhere in there, it's a sort of Endeavor pitch. One of the panelists asked me, so I saw, on your notes at your fundraising, how is it going? And in a moment of vulnerability, I sighed hard and I looked at them. I said, not well. And so later, and that's really the power of the Endeavor network, like they scrambled a team, like they got on top of this thing, because then in that panel, I got admitted into the network. I think a week later, I was with a fundraising team and they were like, okay, like how can we add value to your fundraising thing? And in that process, they put me in touch with a mentor. He was an Argentinian entrepreneur. So I had a call with this guy. He quiz. Then he concluded, he's like, okay, you're certainly a very smart guy. You know your space. You've got a good business. And you seem to be talking to the right people. So it's like, so why is it not closing? Then he says, okay, you know what? Run me your pitch. I asked him, what do you mean? He says, like, assume I'm an investor. Pitch me the same way you're pitching investors. And so I pitched him. And then he laughed. He said, okay, Ken, there is your problem. Your storytelling sucks.
And I'm sure here you're being told, hey, you're an excellent speaker.
Yes, in fact, my friends used to my friends used to say, Ken has a gift of the gab. So I knew that I was generally a good presenter. Anyway, so when I understood that, I fired my advisor and hired another one. And so I went through actually storytelling coaching, right? Like, okay. And it was simple things, right? Like, so they would ask me, how many markets are you in? And then my typical answer would be like, we're not in as many markets as we'd like. And so the guy would say, why would you say that? It's like, you're in 13 markets, including 4 that matter the most in Africa.
At the time. And actually now, Cellulant is in 35.
Now we serve customers in 35 markets, right? We have offices in 18 and serve customers. So it's like, it doesn't really matter that Africa has 54 countries. So in my mind, I'm like, look, we're only at 13 out of 54. In his mind, you are in 13, including the 4 that really matter, right? Like it's like
positioning.
Same fact, different thing. So there's a craft to it. And so after this training, like same guys, the tide changed and just a sense of urgency. So I think storytelling, knowing how to frame, understanding how investors listen to things and so on is a very important skill when you're doing fundraising, right? Like, it's very important. I think the second thing is that you need to, before you get on the road, you need to organize the business in a way that it continues to grow, right? Because, like, it's going to be a long journey of pitching and quoting and converting, especially the later rounds. And so you want to make sure that you maintain a steady curve of growth. And because as a founder, you're going to be on the road for a long time. So if you haven't hired a good team, if you haven't built your go-to-market teams and so on and so forth, that time you disconnect from the business, if the business starts to taper, then it doesn't really matter how good your story is, doesn't matter how good your governance is, doesn't matter how sharp you are on your business model. It's not a good story. Investors buy onto a growth story, right? So the business, they need to be seeing it as, you meet month one, the second month as they meet, the business has grown. Third month as you meet, the business has grown. Like, it's also very important. Tell the story and then organize the business that it continues to grow. And then the third thing is just do the work, right? Like, don't talk to 2 investors or 10 investors. If it's harder for you as an African to raise capital, then talk to more people. I'm not a big buyer, so I understand. The ecosystem requires more African capital, but still, if you need to get funded to meet your mission, and your mission is important, then you just got to work harder and suck it in, right? Like,
wow, powerful insights, right? And I don't think I think the storytelling perhaps is the one that we don't hear very often.
Yeah,
and I think from what you described, it is critical.
Yeah.
Now, for an entrepreneur, because again, you want this to be useful to everybody who's listening, where would they find those folks who will support with that storytelling?
Yes, good question. I think luckily the market is certainly getting sophisticated by the day. So if I look at the current, late 20s, 30-something-year-old entrepreneurs that I've run into the last few years that I've been away from the day-to-day hustle of running Cellulant. Oh, they are really, like, the accelerators and the hubs and the YCs have really polished people in terms of storytelling. I think the challenge actually is that there's very good storytelling, maybe not as much focus in terms of building the business fundamentals, right? So there's also a little bit of that's a problem. I think that problem, as the ecosystem just gets a little bit more mature, will solve itself, I think. But that consciousness, I think, is there. I think most of the entrepreneurs are doing a lot of pitching, and that's good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, very insightful. So I think we'll move on to perhaps the next chapter. In those 17 years at the helm of Cellulant, you steered the company through some very traumatic incidents. Notably, the Dusit terrorist attack in Nairobi, in which you lost 6 of your employees. That was a dark day for Kenya. How did your leadership change during and in the wake of that crisis?
Yeah, 2019, and to a large extent 2020, were really incredibly difficult years. I think in 2019, the time was very difficult for all of us. But I think, so for me as human being, was very difficult. Just because we just lost a lot of really special people. And then a large part of the team and ourselves really were really like a, dark phase and different journeys of sort of dealing with what was happening. But I think it was probably easier time for me as a leader because I got supported more than any other time. I wasn't alone. And for me, the job was really a singular job. It was for the first time that I just a single parameter of leading, which is to just take care of the people. Like that's it. Was when it became clear what had happened. I think it was January 15th that it happened. So myself and our senior leadership team had gone to Zambia. We were to kick off the year because we had just raised capital a couple of months before. And so we knew that we sort of needed to evolve the strategy for the next few years. So we gathered a couple of leaders. We had landed mostly in Zambia that morning. So right to when the attack happened, and it was a terrible afternoon because we followed the attack on the company WhatsApp group. So it was almost like on a, sort of seeing a sort of blow by blow account of like a horror movie, and we were so far off to really be able to make a difference. But at the end of that evening, we kind of knew who we had lost and how we had lost them. And I think, something just kicks in and you're like, oh, I remember towards the end of that evening, we're like, oh my goodness, like all of us we've been on the front row seat of this thing. What about the parents of anybody that was in the building? And the ones that didn't make it out, like, what's their source of info? Who are they talking to? Who they are now a responsibility. And right from that moment, it was always it was first caring for the parents, for the people we lost, caring for our colleagues who survived because there was quite a large number of colleagues who were present when the brave six died, and then taking care of everybody else who essentially was going through a journey of grief in one form or another. So in that sense, the leadership mandate was much simpler, which is just care for the people. And what I realized is you cared for the people and they cared back. It was never alone. I remember, so I took the flight off from Zambia that evening, and I landed in Nairobi the next day. And instantly, a couple of things hit me. So number one is, as I was arriving, I was landing actually with a bunch of there was other teams that were arriving with me from different flights that morning. And there was an engineering team somewhere in the course of that night. There was a meeting. Remember, all the senior guys were away.
Yes.
So this was sort of, if you, the CEO, then there's second level. This was like the third level of leadership. And they had scrambled a disaster recovery center. They had organized a shift system. They knew that the teams that were going to be emotionally strong were the engineering teams outside, and essentially these guys were reporting to duty, to the backup center to make sure that services and customers were taken care of, because they knew that the teams in Kenya were going to really not be in any decent shape to take care of business. Like, there was no management memo and so on. So already when you see that, then you know that that's not something you need to worry about. Because as a leader, you have always different constituencies. And then So I got picked up from the airport. I went home, changed. And then the team had set up like just next to the complex. They had set up some kind of center, so the parents had been gathered. We had talked to them the previous night, so we had divided. A couple of us had made calls to the parents, and so they were there. And then each of them had a team that was taking care of them, because then it wasn't, it wasn't clear. We knew who had passed on in the previous night, but we couldn't officially tell the parents because it was now a police site, and there was just some protocol about reporting what has happened, who died, and so on and so forth. So the parents had like an account management team that was taking care of them. So I came and I was introduced to the parents. So I didn't need to worry about that, like it had gotten taken care of. And so as I, later that evening, I was talking to one of the parents, and now it had become clear that she had lost her son, and said so. So I told her, I'm so sorry. She said, no, you take care of yourself. She's like, don't worry about us. She's like, God's given us, 19 years. Our son was like an intern with this guy. Who am I to question him when he decides to take him away?
Oh.
So they gave us a lot of strength. Like, you can imagine a situation like that, you can't even begin to believe somebody who's actually lost a son. So leadership in that, so as a human being, very difficult thing to live through. And you're never really the same, actually, when you go through that. But from a leadership point of view, it's like the power of humanity. It's like you take care of human beings, they take care of you back, right? Like that's almost always the lesson. And interestingly so, sometimes I'd be sitting at home and you're checking up on people, and then people call you and say, and how are you doing? Like, who's checking up on you?
Yeah, it's true.
And customers would, like I was really taken care of by the people. And then I only needed to just worry about them as well. So we took care of each other. It made it possible, and we had a remarkable time of recovery for everybody. Out of that thing. Our current head of engineering, a young guy, he lost his brother in that attack, and today he leads the engineering team. So it's so very dark year. Beautiful things came out of it. We got new families, we got new parents, and so I remember chatting with Mike. And he says, yeah, my dad and my mom, they're always asking about you, and they're always praying for you. And they always, every time they pray, they say, pray for Cellulant and pray for Ken.
Oh, what a horrific situation, I think, for everyone who is involved. I think for you being at the helm, but also it's wonderful to hear that there are also some beautiful things that came out of that.
Yeah.
And then not too shortly after, in Nigeria, you had to deal with a different type of crisis. Fraud in the business. How did your leadership change in that crisis?
Yeah, so crisis leadership, I think, I find it's almost always the first thing, I think, for a leader is to find, in the crisis, what is the single thing that matters most? So for 2019, it was the people. It's like caring for the people. And then there was a circle. I think the crisis in Nigeria was fundamentally around what was, I think, for me, the right thing for the business to do for the business. And at that time, I think Yeah, I mean, it was very obvious, right? Like if you've got fraud or suspicion of fraud, like you treat it with the utmost seriousness, right? Because the business has a lot of stakeholders. You have customer stakeholders, you have investors, and so on. And I think in that particular crisis, that what made it especially more difficult, I think, is that my co-founder Bolaji, was basically responsible for Nigeria, and we didn't see the issue with the same lens and with the same clarity at a time when we have a governance, we have a risk committee in the board, and all of that. So the result of that division ended up with Bolaji having to leave the business at a time. I didn't think that we could afford his departure, at a time when I personally didn't think that he ought to have left. Our investors were new. Everybody was new, so you can imagine the nerves around that kind of thing. So that crisis actually broke our partnership and friendship. Partnership, probably irreparably. Friendship, certainly. I think it's probably reparable. At some point, we will need to find each other and look at each other and ask ourselves what the hell happened, right? So we chat on WhatsApp now, but we had gone on radio silence for long. And Bolaji was not just a business partner. Bolaji was
sounds like he was a brother.
He's my best man in my wedding. And I think when Bolaji left, I lost something for the business. I think I was always very clear-minded about the mission and what we wanted to do. I think when Bolaji left, I think for that time it probably was too much for me to bear. I think thereafter it became very I never felt for Cellulant the same way that I did before. It's never come back.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you even just for the vulnerability and for sharing that story, because I think we need to be transparent that, you might see the accolades and the prestigious awards, but sometimes there's often pain as well in the business.
It's always a very tough journey.
And some might say that there is still unfinished business with Cellulant. What do you say to that? And more specifically, has there been closure for you with Cellulant?
Look, I think I didn't leave at my own timing, right? I think in 2020, once Bolaji left, I was so exhausted because, I'd had several years of crisis, long fundraising cycle. And before I went onto the road in 2017, fundraising, we had just survived a banking collapse in 2016. The 2016 bank collapse, 2017, 18, I was on extended fundraising, 2019. And the impact of 2019 was actually, it cost us about 3 to 4 years of the business's development, right? Because these were senior technology folks. And I hadn't quite taken a break over these years. So 2020, as I think October it was, I was so exhausted I took time off. And my Koi looked at me on this first day, when we landed on holiday. And so I think it was at dinner, and she just says, "You're not going back. The business is going to kill you." Because for a week before that, I'd not had a wink of sleep. And and she told me, look, I mean, I listened to her, and then I said, okay, I think then I think I should do another 3 years, sort of get the business going, get the succession going, and so on. But she looked at me dead serious, and she's like, no, like, you leave now, because we are not gonna make it. In fact, she said, I'm not gonna make it.
Oh.
And that has a very different connotation to we are not gonna make it, and so on. And so I felt cornered because, it was very clear that she was asking me to choose between business and family. I think it had become clear that I generally wasn't paying attention. Like, it was difficult to actually do both. I think when it became clear that I needed to choose between business and family, it was very clear. And when I wrote my draft note to the board, and then I spoke to our chairman, I spoke to 2 or 3 other colleagues, I felt like a heavy load lifted off my shoulder. And so I would say that we wrote a nice article shortly thereafter, rather than sort of doing a press release. It was called "Jumping Off the Lion."
Okay.
But it was actually sort of falling off a lion because it wasn't my timing. Frankly, the business did hurt because there was a lot of stuff on the strategy front that had gotten delayed, throughout the 2019-2020 season that hadn't finished, and that work was very critical to the phase of the business in a sense. So the business then sort of didn't continue growing as it ought to have, and that hurts me a lot, right? And also economically, right? It's not a good thing. So there's a bunch of friends who believe that the final chapter isn't written, and they say, "Hey, you're jumping off a lion. We don't think it's a final chapter. I think there's you haven't made the headlines yet with the $1 billion exit, which is what you wanted to do." And that is now increasingly seen as an important story for the ecosystem. So there's a part of me that toys with different ideas around what that final chapter could look like, and so on. Obviously, conscious the fact that the business has a large pool of private equity investors who are sort of majority owners. So I think there's some work to be done. I don't know in what shape and form that work looks like, but yeah.
I think I'm smiling because I think I'm on the camp that there is still, and I think I've voiced this, that there is still unfinished business, because I think one of the consistent comments about this market is that we haven't seen an exit. So I think the idea formation from 2002, I think it would be wonderful to see you sort of conclude that. But then at your own time, we'll wait and see how that you know my views.
You remember the story that I said, if you want to find God, start a business.
Yeah.
So I started to think about and to concretize some ideas around this particular thing, and then at some point, when I wrote the ideas, made them very clear. I said, God, look, what man can do, Ken has done. Now, if you really want me to sort of, conclude that chapter, show me a sign.
So we're manifesting this out there, right? It's out there. So let's see how it goes.
So for those of you who say a prayer every now and then, if you keep me in mind, just say a prayer that God shows me that sign.
Yeah.
Yep.
No. Oh, wonderful. And so now, after 2021, you leave Cellulant and you join Market Force as their board chairman, where you assisted them to raise $40 million, not a small amount. And then subsequently established PANI, which is a boutique investment bank empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs. So one, I'd love to hear a little bit more about PANI. And two, what advice would you give a budding entrepreneur looking to build a leading and sustainable business in Africa?
Interesting. Yeah, I think the idea for PANI, if you look at the Cellulant journey, was so long and tough that it was almost natural that the next phase of evolution of really what fundamentally is really the same mission, right? Like Cellulant was really about the ecosystem, was about setting a shining example so others could follow, which is, you could generally say, it's not even a wealth mission. It's actually like an ecosystem mission, right? Of catalyzing an ecosystem. So it was natural that PANI would be the next phase, which is saying, hey, we've got 20 years of really expensive learnings that we owed it to ourselves to really build PANI into a machine for sort of cascading and being really efficient at sort of, solving a couple of the critical problems we saw, and where we would feel that you could make the same journey with less time, maybe less money, and therefore you could actually get more people succeeding at that level. So the idea of PANI was actually to do two things. One was to build a model of walking the journey with entrepreneurs so they didn't make as many mistakes as possible. They could benefit from the network and the social capital that we built, and just the process of building the pieces of a really large business. And because we also believe that the businesses have to grow, like that's have to grow, and some of them have to grow incredibly large, right? Like that's important for the ecosystem. And then the second thing was actually that we'd provide a model for Africans investing in African entrepreneurs. That problem that where capital seem to go to expatriate founders and so on and so forth.
Yes.
You always say, yeah, you can complain, but if it's not your capital, the capital is tribal. Capital likes to understand, and if you're an expatriate founder, you grown out of the US, you grown out of Europe, chances are a European fund would understand you much faster, right?
Yeah.
Like us, even if like if you think about logically, forget prejudices and all of that, like that's just life. So we just have to create a huge pool of African capital that understands Africa, that understands African entrepreneurs, that understands their context. And that means then that we needed to try to pioneer like an investing format that works for Africans and African founders, and go out and actually sell to African investors and invest. And I think actually it was quite encouraging actually that actually African investors want to invest. They just needed to understand. They needed to have a little bit more trust. And I'm happy that the Cellulant journey, for whatever it's worth, allowed that what we've put together in PANI to have some of those elements and give us a shot. So we've raised a little capital, not a lot, given, from the wider, if you think about, at peak, the startup ecosystem was raising I think in the peak year, we were headed to almost $6 billion for the year.
Wow.
So our fund is a small one. But that I generally believe that scale is a very big part of the impact. So we start with a $5 million fund, about 99 LPs or nano LPs, I call them lovingly. But our thinking actually is to sort of inspire and catalyze almost like $10 billion of African capital. And the capital pools are there, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
We just need to motivate them, right?
We need
to find them.
It's going into land banks and real estate.
Exactly. Exactly. So the capital is there. We just need to get it out of, charm it into tech and into businesses. And I think that will do.
So what we always ask on this podcast is that we are very intentional about asking, what can the Doers Defined community essentially support you with in this particular season?
Great. I think and I'm sure it's going to be a great community. I think there's only one way to support our work that's quick and direct, and it's to be nano LPs in our 1-1 fund, which is kind of the first fund, and not just invest money but also time to mentor the entrepreneurs, the cohort of entrepreneurs who are building. So Fund 101 is 10 entrepreneurs, so Africans, it's about 99 Africans putting $5 million in a curated group of 10 companies. I think all of them who aspire to be bigger than Cellulant.
I love that. And is that why you also picked them? I mean, that's serious ambition.
100%. Imagine even without trying. Somebody told me, I think a couple of months ago, that the Cellulant Mafia, there was an article that was written around Cellulant Mafias, like ex-Cellulant folks who've gone out. Actually, there's about 50 businesses born out of ex-Cellulant folks.
Oh, remarkable.
Yeah.
That's catalyzing the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And 3 of them are probably larger by revenue than Cellulant today.
Oh, my gosh.
So Cellulant, of course, as a profile, we always punch a little bit above our weight, right? Like when I typically do a guest check and ask guys, could you guess how big Cellulant is? It's almost always, everybody almost always guesses 5 times, 10 times bigger than what it actually is in revenue terms. So those businesses, they may not be bigger in profile, but they're bigger in revenue, which is a good thing. So for the 10 that we are curating, we want them to be both. We want them to be exemplars in terms of just their conduct, their values, their brand, and what they aspire for. And then also to be big, and to be big wealth creators, right? Because we need hard dollars to develop the continent.
Absolutely.
Right?
And we need generational wealth as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think for all the viewers, for all those conversations that I've had asking me about where to deploy money onto the continent, Ken's PANI is a clear example of a place where, one, you'd get return, folks who know what they're doing and who are here for the long term and the long haul. Ken,
thank you for that.
I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for the conversation.
For sharing, for educating us, for informing us, for allowing us to learn from the many years that you've gone through as an entrepreneur, and for leading the charge, because every single person, and this comes from the heart, if I actually ever hear somebody talk about Ken, one, you're just an inspiring person. You're an incredibly kind person, and you care about this continent. So I think with all those, I have no words, but just to say I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
I am joining this journey of PANI, and I can't wait again to also see the unfinished business of Cellulant and to see what else you create.
Thank you very much.
Asante.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having
Ken.
me. Okay.